They called me the responsible one, but I was just their personal piggy bank. I found the first document on a Tuesday. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, the whispered conversations that stopped when I walked into the room, the sudden urgency of family emergencies that always seemed to require my financial intervention, the way my siblings' lifestyles never quite matched their stated incomes. But I was the responsible one. The dependable one. The one who always came through. It's funny how a single sheet of paper can shatter 32 years of trust. I wasn't even looking for anything suspicious that day. I was helping my mother organize her home office while she recovered from knee surgery. She'd always been meticulously organized, a trait I thought I'd inherited, which is why the misplaced bank statement caught my attention. It was wedged between two folders in her filing cabinet, partially hidden as if accidentally slipped between them. Franklin Family Trust, it read across the top in bold letters. I frowned. I'd never heard of any family trust. As I skimmed the statement, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. The trust had been established 15 years ago, coinciding with my father's death. That alone wasn't surprising. Dad had always been responsible about planning for the future. What froze me in place was the list of beneficiaries: my mother, Diane, my brother, Robert, my sister, Caitlin. My name was nowhere to be found. Mom? I called out, walking into the living room where she was propped up on the couch, her bandaged knee elevated on a stack of pillows. What's the Franklin Family Trust? I didn't immediately notice how her face drained of color, too busy staring at the paper in my hands. Oh, Emma, she said, reaching for her glass of water on the side table. Her hand trembled slightly. Where did you find that? In your filing cabinet. I was organizing the insurance paperwork like you asked. I looked up at her. Why is this the first time I'm hearing about this trust? And why am I not listed as a beneficiary? She took a long sip of water, clearly buying time. It's complicated, sweetheart. Your father set that up for some specific investments. It's really nothing for you to worry about. Something in her tone raised my suspicions. My mother had never been a good liar, her voice always pitched slightly higher when she wasn't telling the whole truth. It was happening now. It says here the trust was funded with $750,000. I pointed to the figure on the statement. That's more than just some investments, Mom. That's most of Dad's life insurance money. The policy had been for $1 million. I remembered because Dad had made a point of telling me about it when I graduated college, explaining how he'd made sure we'd all be taken care of if anything happened to him. I'd assumed the money had been split between the four of us when he died suddenly of a heart attack 15 years ago. Emma, you're making this into something it's not. Mom shifted uncomfortably, wincing as she accidentally moved her knee. Your father wanted to ensure we were all secure. You were already doing so well with your career, and he was so proud of you for that. So I was excluded because I was successful? The logic made no sense. That doesn't sound like Dad at all. We didn't exclude you, she said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. Your father and I just made different arrangements for you. Remember that we helped with your down payment on your condo. That help had been $25,000, substantial, yes, but nowhere near a third of $750,000. Mom, this doesn't add up. I sat down in the armchair across from her, still clutching the statement. If there were different arrangements for me, what were they? Where's that documentation? She looked away, suddenly very interested in adjusting her knee pillow. I don't have all the paperwork here. Your brother handles most of the financial matters now. Robert? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. My older brother had bounced from one failed business venture to another since college. The idea that he was managing family finances was laughable. Since when? He's been helping me since your father died. He's really matured, Emma. You just don't see that side of him because you're always so busy with work. The subtle guilt trip wasn't lost on me. It was a familiar refrain: Emma's too busy for family, Emma cares more about her career than us, Emma doesn't understand how hard things are for everyone else. I'd heard variations of it for years, usually right before someone asked me for money. I'm going to call Robert, I said, pulling out my phone. Mom's reaction was immediate. No. I mean, not now. He's in the middle of some big deal. Let me talk to him first, and we can all sit down together next weekend. A week. She wanted a week to get their story straight. Fine, I said, standing up. I folded the statement and slipped it into my pocket. Next Saturday. I'll expect both Robert and Caitlin to be here, and I want to see all the documentation related to Dad's estate in this trust. Emma, please, Mom said, her voice softening. Don't make this into a big drama. Family is all we have. Family is all we have. Another familiar refrain, usually deployed when someone wanted me to overlook something questionable for the sake of family harmony. I looked at my mother, the woman who had taught me the importance of honesty, who had always insisted that our family didn't keep secrets from each other, and felt something shift inside me. A small crack in the foundation of trust I'd built my life upon. "I'll see you on Saturday," I said, and walked out. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I hadn't visited in months, busy with the demands of my job as a hospital administrator. The guilty voice in my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like my mother's, whispered that this proved I really was too wrapped up in my career to care about family. I silenced it as I placed fresh flowers on Dad's grave. "I miss you," I said aloud, though no one was around to hear. "I wish you were here to explain all this." My father had been my rock, the one person who had always encouraged my ambitions without making me feel selfish for pursuing them. After he died, something in the family dynamic had shifted. I'd become the one everyone turned to in a crisis, the one expected to drop everything when someone needed help. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew would give me straight advice. "Dr. Patel's office," answered a familiar voice. "Nisha, it's Emma." "Emma." My oldest friend's voice immediately warmed. "Is everything okay? You're not canceling lunch tomorrow, are you?" "No, not canceling." I hesitated. "But I could use some advice. Professional advice." There was a pause. "I can fit you in at 5:30 if you can get here by then." Nisha Patel had been my roommate in college before going on to become a financial advisor. She specialized in helping women take control of their finances, particularly after divorces or family deaths. I'd referred several hospital colleagues to her over the years. I'd never expected to need her services myself. At her office, I handed over the trust statement. Nisha studied it through her sleek glasses, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "When did you first learn about this?" she asked. "About 3 hours ago." I explained the circumstances of my discovery and my mother's reaction. Nisha put the statement down and folded her hands on her desk. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer. In the 15 years since your father died, have there been patterns of your family asking you for financial assistance?" I felt defensive immediately. Everyone needs help sometimes. I'm not asking if they've occasionally needed help. I'm asking if there's been a pattern. I thought about it. Robert's failed restaurant that had cost me $40,000 in investment I never saw returns on. Caitlin's chronic emergencies with her car, her rent, her children's private school tuition. My mother's house repairs that somehow always seemed to fall to me to fund. "Yes," I admitted. "There's been a pattern." Nisha nodded as if this confirmed something. "And in these 15 years, have they ever offered to help you financially? Even when you've experienced setbacks?" I remembered the medical bills after my appendectomy 3 years ago, when I'd been between insurance coverage due to changing jobs. I'd drained my emergency fund rather than ask for help. It hadn't even occurred to me that I could ask my family, despite the fact that I'd paid for Robert's rehab stay just 6 months earlier. "No," I said quietly. "They haven't." Nisha removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. "Emma, I'm going to be direct with you because you're my friend, not just my client. Based on this single document and what you've told me, I'm concerned you've been the victim of financial exploitation by your family." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's a strong accusation." "Yes, it is." She slid the statement back to me. "And I hope I'm wrong. But I've seen this scenario play out before. A responsible family member is excluded from inherited assets while simultaneously being positioned as the family financial safety net." "That doesn't make sense," I argued. "Why would they cut me out if they wanted my money?" "Because people who engage in this kind of behavior don't think long term. They see an immediate pot of money, your father's life insurance, and they want to control it. Then when that money runs out, they turn to the family member who is financially stable and responsible. That's cynical. It's unfortunately common." Nisha leaned forward. "Look, gather more information before jumping to conclusions. But protect yourself in the meantime. Don't confront them until you have all the facts, and don't give them any money until you understand the complete picture." I nodded, though the advice felt harsh. These were my family members, not con artists. There had to be a reasonable explanation. "One more thing," Nisha added as I stood to leave. "Request a copy of your credit report." "My credit report? Why?" Her expression was grim. "Because family members who share a lot of personal information often know all the details needed to open credit in each other's names. And it's surprisingly common in these situations." The suggestion seemed paranoid, but I thanked her anyway. On the drive home, I tried to rationalize what I'd found. Maybe this trust was earmarked for my mother's care as she aged. Maybe there was a separate trust with my name on it that I just hadn't discovered yet. Maybe there was a logical explanation for all of this. But deep down, a voice I'd been ignoring for years was finally being heard. It whispered uncomfortable questions. Why had I paid for so many family expenses over the years if there was a trust with $750,000 in it? Why did Robert drive a BMW when he hadn't held a steady job in a decade? How did Caitlin afford yearly international vacations while claiming she couldn't cover her children's school supplies? When I got home, I didn't pour a glass of wine and try to forget about it, as I might have done before. Instead, I opened my laptop and requested my credit reports from all three bureaus. Then I dug out my tax returns for the past 15 years and began making a spreadsheet of all the money I'd loaned to family members. The numbers were staggering. $127,840 to Robert over 15 years. $93,275 to Caitlin. $86,500 to my mother. More than $300,000 that I would never see again. Money that could have funded a house instead of my modest condo, or built a substantial investment portfolio, or allowed me to take a sabbatical from my demanding job. And all while they potentially had access to a trust worth $750,000. I was still staring at those numbers when my email notification pinged. My credit reports were available. I opened them with a growing sense of dread. There, on the second page of the Experian report, was an American Express account open 8 years ago that I had never applied for. The balance was maxed out at $32,000. The TransUnion report showed a personal loan from SoFi for $45,000, opened 3 years ago. Equifax revealed a recently opened Home Depot card with a $5,000 balance. I felt physically sick. Someone had stolen my identity, and given the timing of my discovery today, I had a horrible feeling I knew exactly who it was. My phone rang, startling me. It was my mother. "Emma? Are you okay? You seemed so upset when you left." I stared at the credit report on my screen, at the debt that wasn't mine but was ruining my financial future. My hand shook as I held the phone. "I'm fine," I lied, hearing the same high pitch in my voice that I'd detected in hers earlier. "Just tired." I called Robert and Caitlin. "They're both coming on Saturday like you wanted, but I really wish you'd reconsider this whole meeting. Robert says the trust is very complicated and not worth getting everyone upset over." I bet he did. "Saturday is fine," I said. "I'm looking forward to understanding everything better." After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my living room, trying to process what was happening. The family had sacrificed so much for had been systematically draining me financially while potentially hiding assets that should have been partially mine. And if the credit accounts were any indication, someone in my family was also committing identity theft against me. I'd always been the responsible one, the dependable one. The one who fixed everyone else's problems. It was time to fix my own. The next few days passed in a blur of research and revelations. I took 2 personal days from work, something I'd rarely done for myself though I'd taken countless days off to handle family emergencies. First, I filed identity theft reports with the police and the credit bureaus for the fraudulent accounts. I didn't name a suspect, not yet, but I carefully documented everything. I placed a freeze on my credit to prevent any new accounts from being opened and contacted each creditor to dispute the fraudulent charges. Then I hired a private investigator. It felt like an extreme step, but Nisha had recommended him as someone discreet who specialized in financial fraud cases. His retainer cleaned out a substantial portion of my savings, but I was done throwing good money after bad. "I need to know what happened to my father's estate," I told him. "And I need to know which family member is using my identity." I gave him all the information I had, including the trust statement and the fraudulent credit accounts. He promised results within 48 hours. While waiting, I did my own digging. I visited the county records office and requested copies of all property records associated with my family members. What I found was illuminating. My mother's house, which I'd thought was still mortgaged, explaining why I often paid for repairs, had been paid off 12 years ago. Around the same time, Robert had purchased a vacation cabin in the mountains that I'd never heard mentioned. Caitlin's name was on a rental property in Florida that apparently generated income she'd never disclosed. By Friday evening, the private investigator had delivered his preliminary findings. They were worse than I'd imagined. The Franklin Family Trust had indeed been established with my father's life insurance money. But that was only part of it. Dad had also had a substantial 401k and stock portfolio that had all gone into the trust. The original amount was closer to $1.2 million, not the $750,000 reflected on the recent statement. Where had the other $450,000 gone? The investigator had also discovered something about the fraudulent credit accounts. They'd been opened using my social security number and personal information, but the physical cards had been mailed to a P.O. box registered to Robert. The statements went to the same box, explaining why I'd never seen paper evidence of the accounts. My brother was stealing my identity. The same brother I'd bailed out of jail after his DUI. The same brother whose rehab I'd paid for, whose failed businesses I'd funded, whose rent I'd covered when he was between opportunities. The same brother who was, apparently, a beneficiary of a trust worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I printed everything the investigator had sent me and placed it in a folder alongside my own findings. Then I wrote a detailed timeline of financial requests my family had made of me over the years, along with documentation of the payments I'd made to them. The picture it painted was damning. Saturday morning arrived with a sense of grim determination. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit, my negotiation outfit that I wore to difficult hospital board meetings. I wanted my family to see me as a professional, not just their soft touch of a daughter and sister. I arrived at my mother's house at precisely 10 a.m., carrying a leather portfolio containing all my documentation. My mother answered the door in a floral housecoat, her knee looking much improved as she walked without a limp. "Emma. You're right on time." She hugged me, and I noticed how stiff I felt in her embrace. "Robert and Caitlin are already here. We're having coffee in the kitchen." I followed her through the house, noting details I'd never paid attention to before. The new high-end appliances in the kitchen that had replaced perfectly functional older models. The expensive artwork on walls that had once held family photos. The designer handbag casually tossed on a chair that cost more than a month of my salary. All purchased with trust fund money? Or with the loans from me that would never be repaid? Robert and Caitlin sat at the kitchen table, both looking irritated at having their Saturday interrupted. Robert, 45 and perpetually tanned despite his unemployment, nursed a coffee mug that I recognized as part of a limited edition set that cost hundreds. Caitlin, my younger sister at 30, was tapping impatiently on her phone, her fingers adorned with several new-looking rings. "The worker bee arrives," Robert said, his attempt at humor falling flat in the tense atmosphere. "Little sis, you look like you're heading to a funeral in that suit." "Maybe I am." I placed my portfolio on the table and remained standing. "The funeral for my trust in this family." The dramatic statement hung in the air. Caitlin looked up from her phone, suddenly attentive. My mother froze halfway to the coffee pot. "What's that supposed to mean?" Robert asked, his casual tone now forced. I opened the portfolio and removed the trust statement. "Let's start with this. The Franklin family trust that none of you ever thought to mention to me." My mother immediately jumped in. "Emma, I told you." "No, Mom. I don't want to hear the same excuse about Dad making different arrangements for me. I want the truth." I pulled out more documents from my portfolio. "I've spent the past few days investigating what happened to Dad's estate. The life insurance, the 401k, the stocks, all of it." Robert's face darkened. "You had no right." "I had every right," I cut him off. "I'm Dad's daughter, same as Caitlin is his daughter and you're his son. We should have shared equally in his estate." "It's more complicated than that," my mother began. "Then and complicated for me," I challenged. "Explain to me why I've given this family over $300,000 in the past 15 years while you've been sitting on a trust potentially worth millions." Caitlin's eyes widened. "Millions? Mom, you said it was almost gone." An interesting slip. So Caitlin knew about the trust but had been told it was depleted. The fractures in their unified front were already showing. "It's not millions," my mother said sharply. "Don't exaggerate, Emma." "Fine. The original amount was $1.2 million. The recent statement shows $750,000. Where did the other $450,000 go?" There was a moment of awkward silence as they exchanged glances. "We've had expenses," Robert finally said, leaning back in his chair with forced casualness. "Mom's had medical bills, the house needed repairs." "I paid for those repairs," I interrupted, "just like I paid for your rehab, and Caitlin's custody lawyer, and Mom's new roof. So I'll ask again, where did the $450,000 go?" Robert's face flushed red. "You're not the only one who's had expenses, Emma. While you've been building your perfect little career, some of us have had real struggles." "Struggles?" I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. "You mean like the struggle to maintain that vacation cabin you bought 12 years ago? The one you've never once mentioned or invited me to?" His face went from red to white. "How did you? Or perhaps Caitlin's struggle with her rental property in Florida? The income from which she's apparently not reporting on her tax returns, based on the records I found. Caitlin slammed her phone down. You've been spying on us? I've been uncovering the truth, I corrected. Something that should have happened 15 years ago. My mother stood up, her earlier physical fragility completely gone. Emma, that's enough. Your father and I made decisions about his estate that we felt were in everyone's best interest. You were always the independent one, the successful one. We knew you'd be fine. So my punishment for being responsible was to be cut out of my inheritance and then systematically drained of my earnings for the next 15 years? I pulled out another document. And what about this, Mom? Did Dad also decide it was in my best interest for Robert to commit identity theft against me? Robert jumped to his feet, knocking his chair backward. You don't know what you're talking about. I turned to face him directly. The American Express with a $32,000 balance. The personal loan for $45,000. The Home Depot card. All opened in my name, all statements going to your P.O. box. Would you like me to read the address for everyone, or do you want to admit what you've done? The room went eerily quiet. My mother's hand went to her throat in what looked like genuine shock. Caitlin stared at Robert, her expression a mix of horror and something else, recognition, perhaps. Like this wasn't the first time she'd learned of something like this. Robert's face underwent a remarkable transformation. The indignation melted away, replaced by the charming smile he'd used to get out of trouble his entire life. Emma, you're making this into something it's not, he said, his voice softening. Yes, I used your information for those accounts, but it was an emergency situation. I was going to pay everything back before you ever found out. With what money? I demanded. You haven't held a real job in a decade. With my trust fund distribution, he said, as if this were obvious. I'm due to receive a substantial amount on my 45th birthday. Next month. I laughed without humor. So you committed felony identity theft, planning to cover it up with trust fund money that should have been partially mine to begin with? It's not like that, he insisted. Look, we're family. Families help each other. You've always been the one to help, Emma. It's just your role. My role. I repeated the words, letting their weight sink in. My role was to give and give while all of you took and took. No one made you give us anything, Caitlin interjected, finding her voice. You offered. Because you asked. Because you came to me with sob stories about not being able to feed your kids or pay your rent. I turned back to my mother. And you. You let this happen. You watched me empty my savings for this family while sitting on a trust worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. My mother's expression hardened. That money was for our security, Emma. Your father didn't want it frittered away. And what about my security? Did either of you ever think about that? You don't need security, Robert scoffed. You've got your big hospital job and your perfect credit score. He paused, then added with a smirk, well, you used to have a perfect credit score. Something in me snapped at his smug acknowledgement of what he'd done to my credit. All the years of suppressed anger, of swallowed resentments, of thinking I was helping my family while they were systematically exploiting me, it all came pouring out. I've filed police reports for identity theft, I said, my voice deadly calm. I've disputed all the fraudulent accounts and placed a freeze on my credit. I've also hired a forensic accountant to trace every dollar that went in and out of the Franklin Family Trust. Robert's smirk vanished. You're bluffing. I pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. His name is Michael Chen. He's expecting to hear from your attorney. You wouldn't do this to your own family, my mother said, but there was a quaver in her voice. What would your father think? I think Dad would be disgusted by what you've all done in his name, I replied. I think he would want justice. And that's exactly what I intend to get. I gathered my documentation back into the portfolio. You have 48 hours to do the right thing. Transfer $200,000 from the trust to a new account in my name, 1/3 of what remains, which is less than I'm legally entitled to. Robert needs to sign a confession about the identity theft and arrange a payment plan for the fraudulent debt. And all of you need to sign agreements that you will never ask me for another penny as long as you live. Or what? Caitlin asked, trying to sound defiant but unable to mask the fear in her voice. Or I go to the district attorney with evidence of fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. I file a civil suit to freeze the trust assets. I report Caitlin's unreported rental income to the IRS. I looked at each of them in turn. I burn it all down. Robert laughed nervously. You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? I met his gaze steadily. The sister you knew, the one who always said yes, who always came through, who put everyone else first, she's gone. You killed her the moment you decided to steal her identity. I walked to the door, then turned back one last time. 48 hours. Make the right choice. I made it all the way to my car before the shaking began. My hands trembled so badly I could barely insert the key into the ignition. Tears threatened, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not where they might see. Instead, I drove directly to Nisha's house. She opened the door in yoga pants and a sweatshirt, took one look at my face, and ushered me inside. "It went that badly?" she asked, guiding me to her couch. "Worse." I collapsed onto the cushions. "Robert's been stealing my identity. The trust exists, and it's substantial. They've been lying to me for 15 years while bleeding me dry." Nisha didn't say "I told you so." She just sat beside me and listened as I poured out everything that had happened. When I finished, she went to her kitchen and returned with 2 glasses of bourbon. "What you did took incredible courage," she said, handing me one of the glasses. "Most people never confront financial abuse, especially when it comes from family." I took a sip, welcoming the burn. I gave them an ultimatum. 48 hours to do the right thing, or I take legal action. "And if they call your bluff?" "It's not a bluff." The certainty in my voice surprised even me. "I'm done protecting them at my own expense." Nisha studied me. "Where will you go from here? Regardless of what they decide?" It was a question I hadn't let myself consider yet. What did a future without my family's constant demands look like? "I don't know," I admitted. "Build a proper emergency fund. Maybe look for a job with less stress, one I actually took because I wanted it, not because it paid enough to support everyone else's emergencies." "That sounds like a start." She clinked her glass against mine. "To new beginnings." I spent the weekend at Nisha's, afraid to return to my condo in case any family members decided to show up unannounced. They all called and texted repeatedly, alternating between anger, guilt trips, and attempts at reconciliation. I didn't respond to any of it. By Sunday evening, my mother called with a different tone. "We've talked it over," she said, her voice tight. "We'll meet your demands, but we want a signed agreement that you'll never pursue legal action against any of us." "I'll have my attorney draw up the paperwork," I replied. "Your attorney? Emma, this is family business. We don't need to get lawyers involved." "We absolutely do. I was done being manipulated. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow with the documents. Once everything is signed and the money is transferred, we can all move on with our lives." There was a long pause. "Will we ever see you again?" There was a tremor in her voice that almost made me waver. "Almost. I don't know, Mom. That depends on whether there's anything worth salvaging." The next 2 weeks were a flurry of legal documents, bank transfers, and painful revelations. My attorney, a steely-eyed woman specializing in family financial disputes, negotiated the terms of our separation. The forensic accountant uncovered even more than I'd suspected. The trust had originally been even larger than reported, close to $1.5 million. Robert had been siphoning funds through a series of investments in his failed business ventures. My mother had used trust assets to make substantial gifts to Caitlin's children's private school, established as scholarships to avoid gift tax implications. Both had regularly received living expense disbursements while simultaneously asking me for money. In the end, I received $225,000 from the trust, less than I was entitled to, but enough to make a fresh start. Robert signed a confession about the identity theft, which my attorney held in escrow. As long as he adhered to the payment plan for the fraudulent debt, it would remain private. All 3 family members signed legally binding agreements never to request financial assistance from me again. It was over. I had won, technically. But victory felt hollow. 6 months passed. I used some of the trust money to pay off my condo and establish a proper emergency fund. I invested the rest for retirement. The identity theft had damaged my credit score, but with time and diligence, I was rebuilding it. I hadn't spoken to my family since the agreements were signed. Occasionally, I saw updates on social media. Robert had taken a job in sales, a first in many years. Caitlin had downsized to a smaller house. My mother had listed her home for sale. The consequences of losing their financial safety net, me, were evident. On the anniversary of my father's death, I visited his grave alone for the first time in many years. Usually, it was a family obligation, with everyone performing the expected roles of grieving family members. This time, I sat on the grass beside his headstone and spoke honestly. "I wish you'd protected me better, Dad," I said quietly. "I wish you'd known what they would do." As I placed fresh flowers on his grave, I noticed someone approaching from the cemetery path. My mother, looking smaller and older than I remembered, carrying her own bouquet. She hesitated when she saw me. "I can come back later." No. I surprised myself with the response. You can stay. She placed her flowers next to mine and stood awkwardly, not sitting on the grass as I was. You look well. I am well, I replied. Better than I've been in a long time. She nodded, eyes downcast. I sold the house. Bought a condo about half the size. It's an adjustment. I said nothing, waiting. Emma, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I am sorry. She looked at me directly for the first time. Not just about the money, though that too. I'm sorry I let you become everyone's solution instead of helping you become your own person. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to make up for 15 years of exploitation. But it was something. Why, Mom? Why did you all do it? She sighed deeply. It started with small things. The trust was there, and it seemed like it would last forever. Robert needed help with his business. Caitlin was struggling with the divorce. You were doing so well, and you always offered before we even had to ask. It became expected. And the identity theft? Her face hardened slightly. I knew nothing about that. Whatever you think of me, I would never have allowed that. I wasn't sure I believed her, but arguing served no purpose now. Are you ever going to forgive us? She asked. I stood up, brushing grass from my pants. I don't know. Forgiveness isn't a switch I can flip. It might be a process, or it might never happen. She nodded, accepting this. Would you consider having coffee sometime? Just to talk? 6 months ago, I would have said yes immediately, eager to smooth things over, to be the peacemaker, the responsible one who puts family harmony above all else. That version of me was gone. Maybe, I said instead. But not right away. I need more time. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy mantle of family obligation had been replaced with something new, boundaries, self-respect, and the freedom to define relationships on my own terms. I had been the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who fixed everyone else's problems while neglecting my own. But not anymore. Now I was just Emma. And for the first time in 15 years, that felt like enough. Update, 2 years later. The cafe is busy for a Wednesday afternoon, but I've secured a corner table with a good view of the entrance. I check my watch, she's 5 minutes late, which isn't surprising. Punctuality was never her strong suit. When she finally walks in, Caitlin looks different than I remember. Her designer clothes have been replaced with a simple sweater and jeans. The flashy jewelry is gone. She spots me and waves hesitantly, then makes her way to my table. Sorry I'm late, she says, sliding into the chair across from me. Tyler's parent-teacher conference ran long. How is he doing? I ask. My nephew is 13 now, a fact that startles me. I've missed 2 years of his life. Better since we got him the educational testing. Turns out he has dyslexia, not attitude problems like his former school kept insisting. She smiles ruefully. The public school has actually been amazing with accommodations. The mention of public school is telling. After our family's financial reckoning, Caitlin had been forced to withdraw her children from the exclusive private academy they'd attended since kindergarten. I'm glad he's getting the support he needs, I say sincerely. A slightly awkward silence falls as the waiter takes our order. When he leaves, Caitlin fidgets with her napkin. Thank you for meeting me, she says finally. I wasn't sure you would. It's our first one-on-one conversation in over 2 years. After the cemetery encounter with my mother, I'd maintained my distance, though I'd eventually agreed to occasional phone calls. Those calls had gradually become less strained, enough that when Caitlin reached out last week asking to meet, I found myself saying yes. I was curious, I admit. Mom mentioned you've made some big changes. Caitlin nods. I've been working full-time for almost a year now. Teaching assistant at the kids' school. The pay isn't great, but the hours match their schedule, and I actually really like it. That's great, Kate. And I mean it. My sister had never held a steady job during her marriage or after her divorce, always claiming she needed to be available for her children. I'm also taking night classes, she continues, a hint of pride in her voice. Working toward teacher certification. Our coffees arrive, and I watch as she adds a single packet of sugar. The sister I remember would have demanded a complicated specialty drink with extra everything. What about you? She asks. Mom says you changed jobs? I did. I can't help the smile that spreads across my face. I left hospital administration. I'm working for a nonprofit now, helping set up healthcare clinics in underserved communities. The pay cut was substantial, but the trust money gave me the freedom to make the switch. You seem happy, she observes. I am. And it's true. Without the constant drain of supporting my family, I've discovered what actually brings me fulfillment. It's not the prestige or salary of running a hospital department, it's making healthcare accessible to those who need it most. We chat about neutral topics for a while: the weather, a movie we've both seen, her children's activities. It feels almost normal, as if we're just two sisters catching up. But we can't avoid the elephant in the room forever. I've been in therapy, Caitlin says abruptly, setting down her coffee cup. For about 18 months now. This surprises me. My sister had always scoffed at the idea of therapy, calling it navel-gazing for people with too much time and money. That's good to hear, I reply cautiously. It's been hard, she continues. Looking at patterns, understanding why I did what I did. Why we all did what we did. She meets my eyes directly. I took advantage of you, Emma. For years. We all did. The simple acknowledgement is unexpected. In our family, apologies were typically vague and quickly followed by requests that everything return to normal. Yes, you did, I say, not unkindly but not sugarcoating it either. I've been trying to understand why. Her voice wavers slightly. There was this dynamic that got established after Dad died. Mom and Robert acted like you owed us something for being successful, like your success was an affront to our struggles. And I just went along with it. I nod, encouraging her to continue. My therapist calls it a family system. Once roles get established, everyone works to maintain them, even when they're toxic. She takes a deep breath. You were assigned the role of provider, and none of us questioned it, especially not me, because I benefited. It's the most insight any family member has shown into what happened. What about Robert? I ask. I haven't spoken to my brother since the confrontation 2 years ago. Caitlin's expression clouds. He's struggling. The identity theft issue affected his ability to get certain jobs. He's managing a retail store now, living in an apartment. She hesitates. He's still angry at you. I'm not surprised. Robert has never taken responsibility for his actions in all the time I've known him. And Mom? Better, actually. The smaller place suits her. She's made friends in her condo community, joined some kind of book club. Caitlin smiles slightly. I think she's rediscovering who she is without always being in crisis mode. I absorb this information, trying to reconcile it with the family I'd grown up with. The family that had exploited me for years. I don't expect forgiveness, Caitlin says after a moment. I just wanted you to know that I understand what we did, and I'm trying to be a better person. A better sister, eventually, if you'll let me. 2 years ago, I would have jumped at this olive branch, eager to restore family harmony at any cost. But I've learned to value myself more highly than that. I appreciate your honesty, I tell her. And I'm glad you're doing the work in therapy. But rebuilding trust takes time. I'm willing to start the process, but there are no quick fixes here. I understand, she says, and I think she actually does. Small steps? Small steps, I agree. Maybe we can do this again next month. When we part outside the cafe, she hugs me briefly. It's not the effusive, manipulative embrace I remember, just a simple gesture of affection. As I walk back to my car, I realize I'm smiling. Not because everything is fixed, it isn't, and some things may never be fully repaired. But because I'm navigating this relationship on my own terms, with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. The old Emma would have immediately reinstated Caitlin to her former place in my life, compromising my own well-being for the sake of family peace. The new Emma understands that healthy relationships require honesty, reciprocity, and respect, none of which can be rushed. I get into my car and check my calendar. I have a dinner date tonight with James, an environmental lawyer I've been seeing for 6 months. A relationship that's balanced and mutually supportive, where resources, emotional and financial, flow in both directions. After dinner, I'll go home to my condo, which is now truly mine in every sense. The walls are painted in colors I chose, not what would please a hypothetical future buyer. My savings account grows monthly without mysterious withdrawals for family emergencies. My future is mine to shape. I was the responsible one. The dependable one. The one who fixed everyone else's problems. Now I'm the one who saved herself. And that has made all the difference.